The first thing I noticed about her was the silence. Not the awkward kind, not the kind that demands to be filled. It was deliberate, measured, the kind of silence that tells you the person across from you is trained to wait you out. I hated it immediately. Dr. Alina Moore sat across from me in a soft gray chair, her posture relaxed but alert, a leather notebook resting unopened on her knee. She didn't smile when I walked in. She didn't frown either. She just looked at me, like she was seeing something that hadn't decided what it wanted to be yet. "Take your time," she said gently when I didn't sit right away. I did, slowly, carefully, like the chair might reject me. The room was designed to feel safe. Warm lighting, neutral colors, a plant by the window that looked like it had never known neglect. Nothing sharp, nothing loud, nothing that reminded you of why you were there. I'd been in therapy before. This felt different. She waited. No clipboard tapping, no opening questions rehearsed to seem human, just patience. "I don't know why I'm here," I finally said. That earned a small nod, not agreement, acknowledgement. "That's usually how it starts," she replied. Her voice was calm, not soothing, controlled, like someone who had learned that emotions didn't need to be raised to be heard. I was told I should talk to someone, so I picked someone close to my apartment. That's it. She didn't write anything down. "Do you disagree with the suggestion?" she asked. I shrugged. I disagree with most suggestions. That was when she smiled, just slightly, not amused, interested. "Then this will be honest," she said. Something about the way she said honest made my chest tighten. I had come prepared to lie. That was my default. You don't survive long without learning how to shape the truth into something manageable, something that fits into the time people give you. But the silence returned, and this time it felt heavier. I crossed my arms. "You're not going to ask about my childhood?" I asked. "Only if you want to talk about it," she replied. "And if I don't, then we won't." It shouldn't have unsettled me. It did. Her eyes stayed on mine, not probing, not judgmental, just present, like she wasn't trying to diagnose me, like she wasn't trying to fix me. I hated that even more. "I don't sleep well," I said suddenly. She nodded. "How long has that been true?" "Years." "Do you know why?" I opened my mouth, then closed it again. "No," I said. That was a lie. She didn't call it out. Instead, she leaned back slightly, giving me space I hadn't realized I was bracing against. "Tell me what nights are like." I stared at the carpet. "They're quiet," I said. "Too quiet. That's when everything shows up." "What's everything?" "The things I don't think about during the day." She wrote something down then, slowly, deliberately. The session ended without fireworks. No breakthrough, no tears, just words laid carefully between us, like pieces of something neither of us named. When I stood to leave, she did too. "Same time next week?" she asked. I hesitated. "I don't know if I'll come back," I said. "That's okay, you still can." Her certainty bothered me all the way home. I told myself I wouldn't go back. I went back. The second session was harder. She asked fewer questions. I spoke more. I hated myself for it. I talked about work, about how I moved through people like a ghost, about how being needed felt safer than being known. She listened. When I finally stopped, she said, "You learned to be invisible." I laughed, sharp and humorless. "I learned to be efficient." She met my eyes. "Invisibility is efficient." I didn't respond. The silence returned, but this time it felt different. Now less like a test, more like an invitation. "You don't have to perform here," she said quietly. That was the moment something shifted, because I had never been anywhere I didn't have to perform. I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. She was older than me, late 40s maybe, lines at the corners of her eyes that suggested laughter she didn't share easily, her hair pulled back in a way that felt intentional, not careless, professional, contained, safe. And suddenly I understood the danger. She wasn't just listening, she was remembering. I saw it in the way her eyes lingered when I spoke, in the way her pen paused mid-air, like she was weighing whether something deserved to be written down. I started noticing small things, the way she always waited an extra beat before responding, the way she adjusted her glasses when I said something that surprised her. She never crossed a line, neither did I, but something sat between us by the third session, unspoken, unacknowledged, truth waiting. "I don't think I'm broken," I said one day, out of nowhere. She tilted her head slightly. "What makes you say that?" "Because broken people want to be fixed. I don't." "What do you want?" The question was gentle. It terrified me. "I want things to stop hurting without pretending they don't hurt." She wrote that down. That night I dreamed of her office, the plant by the window, the chair I sat in, the silence that felt like permission. I woke up angry with myself. By the fifth session, I realized something else. Dr. Alina Moore never talked about herself, not once, not a childhood anecdote, not a personal reference, nothing that anchored her outside that room. She was a presence, not a person, and that made me curious. "Do you ever get tired of listening to other people's mess?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Listening isn't the hard part." "What is?" She hesitated, knowing when not to speak. That answer stayed with me. By the seventh session, I was telling her things I hadn't planned to tell anyone, not dramatic confessions, small truths, the kind that matter more. "I don't let people get close," I said. "Why?" she asked. "Because they always want more than I can give." "What do you think they want?" I swallowed. "Truth." She didn't look away. I felt it then. Not attraction, recognition. And that was worse, because attraction passes, recognition changes things. When the session ended, I stood slower than usual. "Alina," I said. It was the first time I'd used her name without the title. She looked up, a flicker of something crossing her face before she smoothed it away. "Yes," I asked. "Do you ever think some truths are dangerous?" I asked. She held my gaze. "Yes," she said quietly, "especially the ones we're not ready for." I left her office with my heart racing, and somewhere between the elevator and the street, I understood something with terrifying clarity. She was my therapist, but I was not just her patient. I was becoming the truth she wasn't ready for. By the 8th session, I knew her schedule better than my own. Not because she told me, because consistency was her language. Same time, same room, same chair angled just enough to avoid confrontation. Same notebook, still mostly blank, as if she trusted memory more than ink. Dr. Alina Moore never rushed me. She never filled silence. She let it stretch until I learned what it felt like not to run from it. That scared me. People think therapy is about talking. For me, it was about being witnessed without interruption, without correction, without someone stepping in to make the story easier to hear. I wasn't used to that kind of attention. "You're quieter today," she observed once. I shrugged. "I didn't sleep." She nodded. "Do you want to talk about why?" "No." She didn't push. And somehow, that made me want to. "I keep thinking about things I didn't say," I admitted. "Here?" she asked. "Everywhere." She waited. "I edit myself constantly, not because I'm afraid of the truth, but because I don't trust people with it." "What happens when you don't edit?" she asked. I smiled faintly. "People leave." She wrote something down. I watched the pen move across the page and wondered what she chose to record, what stayed with her after I walked out the door. You don't flinch, I said suddenly. She looked up. At what? At me, I replied. Most people do. Her expression softened just slightly. I don't see anything to flinch at. That wasn't reassurance. It was a statement. I left that day feeling exposed in a way that had nothing to do with vulnerability and everything to do with truth, like I had stepped into a room where mirrors didn't distort. I started noticing the after effects. Things I said in session followed me into the week, echoed back at odd moments. I found myself asking questions I had never allowed myself to form. Why did I feel calmer around someone who never offered comfort? Why did restraint feel safer than reassurance? The answers unsettled me. By the 10th session, Elena began asking different questions, not deeper, sharper. When did you first learn to keep things to yourself? What happens in your body when you want something? Who taught you that wanting was dangerous? I answered carefully, strategically. I had learned, after all, but every time I dodged something important, she noticed. You don't have to protect me, she said once. I'm not, I replied. She tilted her head. Then who? I didn't answer. The silence that followed wasn't heavy, it was precise. You don't trust easily, she continued, but you're not closed. You're vigilant. I exhaled slowly. That's a kinder word for it. She smiled faintly. It's an accurate one. I watched her then, not like a patient watches a therapist, but like a person trying to understand another person's edges. She was careful in ways that felt practiced. She never leaned forward too quickly, never softened her voice to invite emotion. She didn't use language that promised safety. She created it, and that was more dangerous than kindness. One afternoon, halfway through a session, I said something I hadn't planned to. I think you remember me. She looked up from her notebook. What makes you think that? The way you listen, I said, like you're holding on to things even after I leave. She paused, just for a moment. I do remember you, she said. That's my job. No, I replied quietly. You remember me differently. Her eyes stayed on mine. That's not something I can discuss, she said gently. It wasn't a rejection, it was a boundary. I nodded, I figured. But the space between us felt charged now, like something had been acknowledged without being named. By the 12th session, I realized something else. She was changing too. Not dramatically, not obviously, but subtly, in ways only someone paying attention would notice. She asked more reflective questions, took longer pauses before responding. Once, she stopped herself mid-sentence and started again with different words. It felt like she was choosing language more carefully. That unsettled me. Therapists weren't supposed to be affected. One day she asked, "What do you think healing looks like for you?" I considered the question longer than usual. I don't want to be lighter, I want to be honest. About what? About what I feel without it becoming a problem, I replied. She nodded slowly. Honesty often feels disruptive before it feels freeing. That sounds like experience, I said. She didn't answer. The silence that followed was different, not deliberate, caught. Elena, I said softly. She looked at me. Do you ever regret not saying things? The question lingered between us. I think, she said carefully, regret comes from confusing impulse with truth. I studied her face. What if the truth is the impulse? Her breath caught. Just barely. She recovered quickly. That's something we can explore from your perspective. She smiled faintly. Of course. But something had shifted. That night, I dreamed of crossing a line. Not physically, emotionally. In the dream, she said my name, not clinically, not gently, but like it meant something outside that room. I woke up with my heart racing. I hated myself for it. By the 15th session, the tension had become a third presence, unspoken, unacknowledged, but undeniable. I tested it carefully. I think people mistake professionalism for distance, I said one day. She considered that. Sometimes it's protection. For who? I asked. For everyone, she replied. Does it ever protect you? I pressed. She met my gaze. More than you know. That was the first time she'd said you like that. Not the patient, not the case. Me. I felt something tighten in my chest. I didn't push. I didn't need to. The truth was already sitting there between us. Patient, dangerous, waiting. When the session ended, she stood with me longer than usual, not blocking the door, not opening it either. I need to remind you that my role here has limits, she said softly. I know. And those limits matter, she added. Yes, I said, always do. She searched my face. Do they? Yes, I said quietly. That's why this matters. She stepped back. I left without looking back, but the air felt different as soon as I was outside, charged, heavy. I understood then what I had been circling without admitting. I wasn't falling for my therapist. I was colliding with the truth she had spent her life learning how not to touch, and I was saying things that stayed with her, whether she wanted them to or not. By the 18th session, silence had become a language neither of us could pretend not to understand. It no longer felt neutral. It felt intentional. Dr. Elena Moore still sat the same way, one leg crossed, notebook balanced on her knee, pen resting between her fingers like a choice she could make or not make at will. But the pauses between her words had changed. They stretched longer, carried more weight. So did mine. "You've been measuring yourself today," she said once. "Against what?" I asked. "Against what you're allowed to say," she replied. I exhaled slowly. I don't want to make things difficult. "For whom?" she asked. The question hovered. "For you," I admitted. Her pen stopped moving. She didn't look up right away. When she did, her expression was carefully neutral, but something in her eyes had shifted. "Why would you worry about that?" she asked. I hesitated. "Because," I said, choosing my words with precision, "this room matters to me, and I don't want to damage it." Her jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "This room is designed to hold difficult things," she said. "It's not fragile." I nodded. "You are." The word landed too cleanly. She didn't correct me. She didn't reframe. She didn't redirect the conversation the way she usually did when something edged too close to her. Instead, she leaned back slightly. "That's not a role reversal we should explore," she said carefully. "I'm not trying to," I replied. "I'm noticing." There it was, the difference between interpretation and observation. She watched me for a long moment. "Not everything that's noticed needs to be spoken." "I disagree," I said quietly. "Some things get heavier the longer you carry them alone." She met my eyes, held them. "That's true, which is why this space exists. For me," I said. "Yes," she replied. The emphasis mattered. I didn't push further, but the air between us felt tighter, charged with restraint, like a wire pulled too taut to stay invisible much longer. I started noticing the changes outside the room, too. I replayed our conversations while walking home, wondered how much of what she said was intentional and how much slipped through because she trusted me to hear it responsibly. I hated that thought. Therapists weren't supposed to trust their clients like that. And yet, by the 20th session, she introduced a new question. "What do you think boundaries are for?" she asked. "To keep people safe," I replied. "From what?" I considered. "From harm." "And from desire?" she asked gently. My chest tightened. "Sometimes," I said. She nodded slowly. "Desire doesn't always arrive with clarity." "No," I agreed. "Sometimes it arrives with recognition." She inhaled, then exhaled. That was the first time she ended a session early. "Let's stop here for today," she said, standing before the hour was over. I stood too. "Did I say something wrong?" I asked. "No," she replied quickly. "You said something honest." She hesitated, then added, and honesty requires pacing. I left unsettled. The next session, she was more formal, not cold, professional. Her questions returned to safer territory, coping mechanisms, grounding exercises, narratives of control. She spoke more, I spoke less. The distance felt deliberate. I understood why, and it hurt anyway. "You're quieter again," she observed. "I'm respecting the pacing," I replied. Her lips pressed together briefly. "You don't have to manage my reactions." "I know," I said, "but I am." She looked at me sharply then, really looked at me. "That's not your responsibility," she said. "I'm aware," I replied. "That doesn't make it untrue." Silence fell. This time, it wasn't safe. By the 23rd session, something had to give. I came in already wound tight, sleep-deprived, thoughts colliding faster than I could separate them. She noticed immediately. "You seem distressed," she said. "I am," I replied. "Do you want to talk about why?" "Yes," I said. She waited. "I don't know how to keep pretending I don't see what's happening here, and I don't know how to talk about it without crossing a line." Her posture stiffened just slightly. "I need to remind you," she began. "I know," I interrupted gently, "and I'm not asking you to respond. I'm just asking to speak." She hesitated, then nodded. I took a breath. "I don't think this is transference, not the way people simplify it. I think it's recognition, and I think that scares you." Her eyes stayed on mine. "That's an interpretation," she replied. "No," I replied, "it's an observation." The room felt suddenly smaller. "I don't expect anything from you," I continued. "I'm not asking you to cross a boundary. I'm asking you not to pretend it exists." She stood up abruptly. "I can't continue this conversation," she said, voice steady but strained. "Then we need to talk about why." Her hands curled into fists at her sides. "Because this is exactly how people get hurt. Because this is how lines blur. Because it's my responsibility to stop that." "And who takes responsibility for what's already here?" I asked. She turned away. "That's my burden," she said quietly. I softened my voice. "It doesn't have to be carried alone." She looked back at me then, not as a therapist, as a woman. And for one unguarded second, I saw it. The conflict, the restraint, the truth she had been holding just as carefully as I had. Then it was gone. "I need to refer you to another clinician," she said. The words hit harder than any rejection. "Because of this?" I asked. "Yes," she replied. "Because continuing would compromise both of us." I nodded slowly. I understood, and that didn't make it hurt less. "When?" I asked. "Soon," she said. "I'll provide options." I swallowed. "Do I get a choice?" She met my eyes. "You always do." The session ended there, not with closure, with rupture. That night I didn't sleep at all. I replayed everything, every pause, every look, every careful word. I wondered if I had imagined it all, if I had mistaken attention for attachment, presence for something else. But my body knew better. So did she. The next session was our last. She was composed, kind, professional. She gave referrals, explained transitions, reassured continuity of care. She did everything right. At the door, I hesitated. "Elena," I said. She looked at me, eyes steady. "I meant what I said," I told her, "about not blaming you." She nodded. "I know. And I don't regret speaking," I added. She inhaled slowly. "Neither do I." That was all. I walked out, and for the first time since I'd started therapy, the silence that followed was not protective. It was loud, and somewhere inside it a truth waited, no longer contained by professional language, no longer held at bay by restraint, a truth that neither of us was ready to face. Yet. Losing her was not dramatic. There was no final argument, no slammed doors, no moment where everything broke at once. It was quieter than that, the kind of quiet that follows when something essential is removed and the world keeps moving anyway. My new therapist's office was different, brighter, less intentional. The questions came faster, more structured, as if efficiency could replace understanding. It couldn't. I answered politely, carefully. I told the story the way it was expected to be told. But the truth, that Elena had changed the way I understood myself, stayed locked somewhere I couldn't access with anyone else. Not because I was protecting her, because I didn't want to dilute what it had been. People assume attachment fades when distance is introduced. Sometimes it does. This didn't. Weeks passed, then months. I rebuilt routines, learned new coping mechanisms, slept better, ate regularly, smiled when it was appropriate. From the outside, I was healing. Inside, something remained unresolved, not painful but present, like a door I'd chosen not to open again because I respected what lived behind it. I thought about Elena less often, but when I did, it was with clarity, not longing. She had done what she was supposed to do. So had I. That didn't mean it hadn't cost us something. Elena Moore returned to her practice with a precision that surprised even her. She adjusted her schedule, reduced her caseload slightly, took longer breaks between sessions. On paper, it looked like balance. In reality, it was containment. She reviewed ethical guidelines more than necessary, not because she doubted them, but because she needed to remember why they existed. The referral had been the right choice. She knew that. She had taught that. Still, there were moments, uninvited and unwelcome, when memory surfaced. Not of me speaking, but of her listening. There was a difference. She noticed it when a patient paused the way I used to, when a truth hovered just out of reach, heavy with recognition, when silence became charged. She never crossed a line again, but she understood now how close lines could come without being touched. That knowledge stayed with her. I didn't expect to see her again, so when I did, it felt unreal. It was a bookstore cafe near the river, neutral territory, somewhere neither of us had chosen intentionally. I noticed her first. She was standing by the shelves, holding a book she wasn't reading, gaze unfocused. She looked softer, less armored. I considered turning away. I didn't. "Elena?" I said, quietly. She turned. For a brief second, the years between us collapsed. Then professionalism returned, controlled, careful. "Hello," she said. We stood there, uncertain. "How are you?" she asked. I answered honestly. "Better." She nodded, relief flickering across her face before she smoothed it away. "I'm glad." We didn't sit together. We didn't linger, but the conversation that followed, brief, respectful, human, felt heavier than hours of therapy ever had. "I hope you found someone who listens the way you need," she said. "I did," I replied, "but it wasn't the same." She met my gaze. "It was never meant to be." I smiled faintly. "I know." Silence settled, not uncomfortable this time, just full. Before we parted, she said, "You didn't do anything wrong." "I know," I said. "Neither did you." That mattered. After that, something loosened, not between us, but inside me. The question I'd been circling finally resolved. What we had shared was not a mistake. It was a moment of alignment between two people who understood restraint deeply enough to honor it. That mattered more than outcome. For Elena, the encounter stirred something she had carefully stored away. Not regret, reflection. She realized that for the first time in her career, she had chosen integrity over comfort, and it had required her to acknowledge her own capacity for feeling. She didn't regret that either. In fact, it clarified something. She had always believed professionalism meant distance. Now she understood it also meant discernment, the ability to feel without acting, to recognize without claiming. That lesson reshaped her work and her life. Months later, when Elena decided to step away from private practice temporarily, it wasn't because of burnout, it was because she wanted to listen differently. To herself. I heard about it secondhand. I smiled. It felt right. We didn't cross paths again for a long time. When we did, it wasn't accidental, it was intentional. She reached out, carefully, respectfully, with clarity. "I no longer have a therapeutic relationship with you," her message began, "and enough time has passed that I believe we can speak as equals." I read it 3 times, then once more. I didn't respond immediately, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted my answer to be as deliberate as hers had always been. When I replied, it was simple. "I agree." That was all. The meeting was neutral, public, thoughtful. No expectations, no assumptions, just 2 women sitting across from each other, finally free of roles that had defined them too rigidly. We talked about books, about work, about how strange it felt to see each other without the frame that had once held us. At one point, Elena said quietly, "I spent a long time believing the right thing was always the hardest thing." "And now?" I asked. "And now," she replied, "I think the right thing is sometimes just the most honest." The words stayed with me, as did she. But this time there was no silence waiting to break, only space and choice. Time did not rush us. That was the first thing I noticed when Elena and I began meeting again, really meeting, without titles or roles standing between us like glass. There was no urgency, no pull toward resolution, no need to reclaim something lost. What we had wasn't something to retrieve, it was something to approach, carefully. Our first meeting after her message took place in a cafe neither of us frequented, chosen precisely because it held no memory. We arrived separately, left separately, and spoke like 2 people relearning the sound of each other's names. We talked about ordinary things, books we hadn't finished, places we wanted to walk without planning, the strange comfort of routines that no longer felt like armor. We didn't talk about therapy. We didn't talk about boundaries. Not yet. There was an ease between us that surprised me, not because it was intimate, but because it wasn't. The tension that had once lived in silence was gone. In its place was something steadier, consent. When the meeting ended, Elena stood and said, "Thank you for meeting me." Not for coming, not for understanding, for meeting her where she was. I nodded. "Thank you for waiting." She smiled then, a real smile, unburdened. We met again weeks later, then again, always in daylight, always in public, always with space left for either of us to step back if something felt off. Nothing did. That was the strange part. The connection didn't feel like temptation anymore. It felt like recognition that had been given room to breathe. One afternoon, while walking along the river, Elena stopped and looked out at the water. "I want to say something," she said. I waited. "I spent years believing that restraint was the highest form of care," she continued, "that if I never crossed a line, no one would be harmed." I nodded. "That's not wrong." "No," she agreed, "but it's incomplete." She turned to face me. "Restraint without honesty becomes avoidance." I felt the truth of that settle somewhere deep. "I wasn't afraid of you," she said quietly. "I was afraid of what recognizing you would ask of me." "And now?" I asked. "And now," she replied, "I know the difference between impulse and truth." We stood there, the river moving steadily beside us. "What's the difference?" I asked. She held my gaze. "Truth waits." So did we. The first time our hands touched, it wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, slow, almost ceremonial in its care. We were sitting on a bench, watching the city soften into evening, our shoulders close, but not touching. The space between us felt intentional, not charged, not withheld, just aware. Elena shifted slightly, then paused, looked at me. "May I?" she asked. The question mattered. "Yes," I said. Her hand rested over mine, not gripping, not claiming, simply present. I exhaled. It didn't feel like crossing a line. It felt like honoring one. What followed wasn't a rush toward romance. It was a gradual unfolding of something that had been held too tightly for too long. We learned each other outside of context, without interpretation, without analysis. Elena laughed more easily now. I noticed it in the way her shoulders loosened, in the way she spoke without weighing every word. I noticed, too, how careful she still was, not out of fear, but respect. That care extended both ways. We talked about what had happened, eventually, not in detail, not with blame, with clarity. "I never wanted to be your awakening," I told her one night. She smiled softly. "You weren't. You were my mirror." "And I never wanted to be someone you had to step away from," I said. "You weren't. You were someone I had to grow toward." Those truths existed side by side without contradiction. Elena did not return to private practice. She moved into teaching instead, training new therapists, speaking openly about ethics, not as restrictions, but as responsibilities. She told them, boundaries don't exist to prevent feeling, they exist to protect truth. I attended one of her lectures once, sitting quietly in the back. She didn't look at me while she spoke. She didn't need to. I heard myself in her words, not as a case, but as influence. And that felt right. As for me, therapy became something I chose rather than endured. I learned to speak without editing myself into invisibility, to want without apology. I didn't become lighter. I became truer. One evening, much later, we sat in Elena's apartment, my first time there. The space was warm, lived in, imperfect in ways her office had never allowed. We cooked together, uncoordinated and laughing, learning the rhythm of shared space. After dinner, we stood by the window, city lights scattered below us. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if we'd ignored it?" I asked. She didn't need clarification. "Yes," she said, "and I'm grateful we didn't." "So am I." We stood quietly, her arm resting lightly against mine. No rush, no fear, just presence. The truth, when it finally arrived, wasn't dramatic. It didn't demand anything. It simply asked if we were ready. And we were. Not because time had erased what came before, but because it had given us the space to choose differently. I didn't become Elena's secret. She didn't become my exception. We became something simpler. Two women who met at the wrong time, did the right thing, and found each other again when honesty no longer required sacrifice. Some truths arrive early, some arrive late, and some arrive exactly when they're meant to be heard.